Hey, welcome back to the channel. Today we'll be talking about how to self-host Grist. Now, Grist is that spreadsheet has become database, a really cool open source project that I've really recently kind of fallen in love with as far as its power and capability and the ability to quickly put together custom database applications for, again, your niche hobbies or your office or whatever you want to use it for. And I've got a couple of freebies for you. One is where you have a Docker Compose document, which is actually this one right here, which is Grist.yaml. And you can use Docker Compose scripts basically to install with like a normal Docker or the different kind of varieties out there, and it also works with the latest CasaOS 4.4 beta. Now, before that, CasaOS used these JSON files that were proprietary to CasaOS, and I'm going to include that too, so you're going to have both. So if you're using the older version, CasaOS 4.3, you'll use the JSON. If you're using the new 4.4 beta, or of course, as soon as they release that to production, it'll be the mainline version, you'll use the YAML file. Also too, if you're going to use it with another Docker installation, you'll be using the YAML file. So let's go ahead and get started and talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing. First of all, here is my local Zimaboard server, which runs CasaOS natively, and I do have Grist installed. In fact, it's running right over here, and I've got a document loaded up, which I can open up. This happens to be a quiz about Docker. I'm sorry, about Grist, actually. So it's definitely working and works great. So, of course, Grist is the spreadsheet slash database, which is really super flexible and handy for storing and kind of organizing all of your stuff. And with the website, it's free for up to like 5,000 rows in a document. Now, of course, you could have 20 documents that have 4,000 rows each, and that would be fine. You wouldn't have to pay. But, if you do want to host it yourself, that's what we're going to be covering today. And we're going to use several different things here. First of all, of course, we're going to use the Grist actual GitHub repository, but we're only going to be using that really through those scripts. And so that's going to be the new YAML file or the old JSON file if you're using an older version of CasaOS. We are also going to be using CasaOS itself. And CasaOS is an open source kind of front end, if you will, to Docker. It just makes Docker a lot easier to use. It has its own app store. It's got this really nice and intuitive interface. So they're trying to basically smooth the people to be able to use Docker more conveniently. They call it a personal cloud here. Now, you can run CasaOS on your own hardware. What you're going to need is x86 or an ARM7 or ARM64 board. Now, I must say, though, that Grist is designed for x86 64-bit processors. So you can't throw this on a Raspberry Pi. It won't work. You'll need to have an Intel processor. Now, with CasaOS, if you just want to use that, again, you can use a Raspberry Pi, you can use an Intel NUC, or, of course, the Zimaboard comes native, and they support a whole bunch of different Linuxes, and that's just because it is a shell, basically. It's just a web-based interface on top of Linux, which basically does all of the Docker command line stuff for you, which makes it super convenient. Now, I will be using a Zimaboard today, and Zimaboards are these cool little fanless. They're they just have a heatsink on top, little servers, and they are pretty powerful, but only for like lightweight server sort of work. Basically, the two models that I would recommend, which would, by the way, be the 432 and 832. Both have an Intel Celeron N3450, which is a quad-core processor that can go up to about 2.2 gigahertz. And the 432 comes with 4 gigs of RAM. 832 comes with 8 gigs of DDR4. And it does have 32 gigs of onboard storage with these two models. However, the Zimaboard also has SATA ports on the back, and you can actually install up to 2 SATA drives. It even has a PCI slot, which is a PCI 2 times 4. Then you can actually plug in your own PCI cards here. For example, you can put in cards to support Wi-Fi. You can also put in cards that might support eMMC storage, things like that. So it's a really flexible board. And on the front, we have 2 gigabit Ethernet NICs and also some USB ports and also the mini display port in the front. Now, of course, I run this headless, so I don't use the mini display port, but it can be convenient occasionally if you need to hook up something and actually see what the Zimaboard is outputting. Again, it does run Linux underneath, and it's actually running a desktop Linux you can actually log into and use as a PC if you would like. So those are all of the different elements. Alrighty, so let's get started and actually install Grist using our YAML file over here. And again, that's because I'm on x-casaos 4.4. If you're on 4.3 or earlier, you would use the JSON file. And the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here, and you can drop down this little menu, and we're going to go to settings here and just take a quick look. And it's set up to automatically download and install the latest version of Grist in this YAML. Again, you can set that to a specific version number if you run into errors or something like that with a specific version of Grist. I've pointed to an icon that's just makes it a little bit prettier, and all the rest of this stuff is kind of the default ports and everything for Grist. And right now it is currently stored in the default data directory on the Zimaboard in x-casaos. So that's kind of the default place that likes to store things. You can change this and point to an external hard drive, which I do have on my Zimaboard, but we're keeping it simple today. Down here I said the CPU is high and it should restart unless I manually stop it. And of course it's named Grist and all that sort of stuff. So we are good on that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop down this menu again, and I'm going to click uninstall. With the Dockers, everything is contained within a Docker file. It only has access to the resources that you specifically tell it to in that file that we just looked at, basically. Now, Grist doesn't have a whole lot of requirements. It just has like this user data folder and stuff like that. I'm going to uncheck that, so we'll keep our user data. And I'm going to click uninstall. There we go, and it's gone. Grist is no longer on this server. Again, that's the beauty of the Docker. You basically, everything's containered, so if you tell it to go away, it's gone. You don't have to worry it's leaving bits and pieces of the program here and there and everywhere. Now, I did save the configuration file and stuff like that because I don't want to reset it back up, but obviously with the new install, it's just going to build a fresh install of Grist. Now, you can hit the plus sign here and click install a custom app. You can also go to the store and install all the different stuff out here. Now, right now you won't find Grist, but hopefully they'll add it soon, or I may well submit it to be added myself. So what we're going to do is we're going to come over here and we're going to do that custom install. And here's that same form, but really nothing is filled out. So what we're going to do is hit the little import button here, and it's asking for the Docker Compose. And again, the Docker Compose are going to be these YAML files. Now, in the past with version 4.3, you had the option to also import their specific JSON format and also the command line interface, which never seemed to work very well, quite frankly, but occasionally it did. Right now, though, they've switched over and they're only using Docker Compose, which are the YAML files. And that's just basically for industry standardization. They didn't want to have their own proprietary JSON files anymore. And so their new store format basically includes the YAML file. And it also includes some other files in there which basically describe the item in the store, include screenshots and stuff like that. So they basically took what they used to have in this JSON file and they kind of split it out into something just much more standardized. But we're just going to go ahead and I'm going to drag in my YAML file here and hit submit. And it says you need to check your path and your ports and all these different things here. So let's just kind of review everything real quick. And of course, this looks eerily familiar. Well, don't be surprised, because this is basically the exact same setup I was using before. Again, it's pulling in the latest Grist. We got our icon here. This is the port that it's going to use. Again, if that port was used, you'd need to change this. Here is the data storage location. If you didn't want it to store in the internal SSD or NVMe on the Zimaboard, you would change that to something else. And so just everything else is filled out exactly the same. So we are going to go ahead and install. And this will take just a minute. You can click continue in the background, but I like to kind of watch the progress here just to make sure everything's going okie dokie. There we go. Now it's built in our icon and everything, but typically with x-casaos, you need to wait a minute or two after it thinks that it's done in order for the CPU utilization to kind of fall here. Now it's already kind of fallen down. In fact, it's fallen down a whole bunch, so it's almost guaranteed to be done now. If it's up around 30 or 40 or whatever, it's probably still busy setting things up. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to close that tab we had to our local Grist instance, and I'm going to go ahead and click on this, and it's going to bring it right back up, and we're back exactly where we were at. So that's basically it. We basically have installed Grist. Now, of course, if you install it without saving the data from the prior install, you'll come to a thing and it'll basically just allow you to create new documents and stuff like that. There won't be anything shown here. That'll be really about the only difference. So that's how you install Grist locally using x-casaos. So these are really all things that I recommend. I love Grist, I love Zimaboard, and I love the x-casaos. Not sponsored by any of these people. I just use their technology a lot. And in fact, Zimaboard is so versatile because it's fanless. I literally right now just have it stuffed next to my router in a tiny electrical closet. Stir, is it cheesy? Yes. Does it work? Yes. And so right now that's where my Zimaboard lives. I will eventually mount it nicely, but for now that's where it's living. And anyway, that's it for the video today. I'll provide these files down below so you can use them to install Grist on your own. Any Docker environment can use that YAML file. You can use x-casaos if you like, but you certainly don't have to. And also too, if you just want to do it by command line, all that information is on the Grist GitHub. They give you the command line options to install Grist and a whole bunch more information about setting up multi-users and things that are just a lot more advanced than we're going to be covering today. Well, that's it for the video. I certainly hope you enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe if you did, and I will talk to you later.